The gardens that steal the show in September are usually decided before August even begins. While most people are already thinking the season is winding down, experienced gardeners are quietly putting a few carefully chosen perennials into the ground and setting themselves up for the most colorful weeks of the entire year. Then September arrives. October follows. Neighboring flower beds begin fading. Annuals start looking tired. And suddenly one garden is still bursting with color, covered in butterflies, and filled with flowers that seem to have appeared right when everything else started slowing down. That is not luck. It is timing. Late July and early August create a surprisingly powerful planting window for many perennial flowers. The soil is warm. Root growth is extremely active. In many parts of the country, the intense heat of midsummer begins easing, just enough for new plants to settle in comfortably. And perhaps most importantly, these perennials still have enough growing season left to establish themselves before winter arrives. The result is a garden that doesn't just look better this fall, it looks better next spring, next summer, and for years afterward. Because every plant on today's list has something important in common. These are not flowers you're planting for a few weeks of enjoyment before throwing them away. These are long-term garden investments. Plant them once, help them establish, and many of them will return year after year, with larger displays, stronger root systems, and even more flowers than they gave you the season before. Some of them are famous for carrying a garden through September, when everything else begins fading. Some are magnets for butterflies and bees at a time when pollinators desperately need late-season nectar. Some thrive in hot sun. Some solve difficult shade problems. And a few of them are so dependable that gardeners have been passing them down through generations for decades. But there is one thing you need to understand before we begin. Late July and early August are not unlimited opportunities. This planting window eventually closes. Every week you wait is a week these perennials could have spent building stronger roots before winter. Every week you delay is a week of establishment time you cannot get back. That doesn't mean you need to rush out this afternoon and buy everything on this list. It simply means that if you've been thinking about adding new perennials this year, now is the moment to start paying attention. Because the gardeners who act during this window are often the same gardeners enjoying the biggest rewards when autumn arrives. And today, we're going through 11 of the very best choices. But before we dive into the list, I have a major announcement. The gardening guide you've been writing to me about for months is finally here. The Plant Once Garden is officially out. You have been incredibly patient with me while I took the time to get this right. It is approximately 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, gathered into one complete reference, designed with a hand-drawn heritage cover and warm cream pages that feel like a guide your grandmother would have owned. Inside, you'll find the 90 perennial plants that come back every year with almost no labor, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, and the hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. I've also included the specific perennials that bring hummingbirds singing and dancing right outside your window, the chapter on what your garden becomes over 20 years, and the mistakes that kill perennials. This is a reference you can lean on for the rest of your gardening life. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the pinned comment or description below to get your copy. Thank you again for your patience. Now, back to the garden. Plant number 1 is a flower that has been lighting up American gardens for generations, and if your goal is reliable color all the way into fall, it is very difficult to find a better place to start than Black-Eyed Susan. Plant 1. Black-Eyed Susan. If you've ever driven down a country road in late summer and noticed huge drifts of bright yellow flowers glowing beside the highway, chances are you were looking at Black-Eyed Susan. There is a reason this perennial appears in so many American landscapes. Few flowers deliver as much color, reliability, and seasonal staying power with so little effort from the gardener. Rudbeckia has a way of showing up precisely when a garden needs it most. Many summer flowers peak in June or July. They put on a beautiful display, then gradually begin slowing down as the season progresses. Black-Eyed Susan does the opposite. While other plants are becoming tired from weeks of heat, this perennial is just getting started. The golden petals surrounding those dark chocolate-colored centers create one of the most recognizable flower combinations in gardening. And when planted in groups rather than as single specimens, the effect becomes extraordinary. Imagine stepping outside on a September morning and seeing dozens of bright yellow blooms catching the sunlight. Butterflies move from flower to flower. Bees are busy collecting nectar. The entire planting seems to glow against the backdrop of green foliage. That is the kind of late-season energy Black-Eyed Susan brings to a garden. What makes it even more valuable is its toughness. This is a plant that handles heat remarkably well once established. It tolerates periods of drought. It rarely asks for fertilizer. Deer generally leave it alone, and it comes back year after year with very little intervention from you. For gardeners who want dependable results without constant maintenance, that combination is difficult to beat. Another advantage is the length of its blooming season. Many varieties flower for weeks on end, often carrying color from midsummer well into autumn. That extended performance is one of the reasons professional landscape designers continue using it in both public and private gardens. And once those flowers finally fade, the seed heads continue providing value. Goldfinches and other birds frequently visit them during the cooler months, turning your flower bed into a source of winter wildlife activity. Plant Black-Eyed Susan in full sun, give it reasonably well-drained soil, and let it do what it has been doing successfully for generations. Because if your goal is a garden that looks alive when many others are fading, this perennial deserves serious consideration. But if Black-Eyed Susan creates color at ground level, the next plant creates something completely different. It creates height. It creates movement. And from a distance, it almost looks like a cloud of purple-blue mist floating above the garden. Plant 2, Russian Sage. Some plants fill space. Russian sage transforms it. The first time you see a mature planting swaying in a light breeze, it becomes immediately obvious why so many gardeners fall in love with it. The tall stems, silver foliage, and endless sprays of lavender blue flowers create a soft, airy appearance that few perennials can match. Instead of forming a dense block of color, Russian sage adds texture and movement. Everything about it feels light. Everything about it feels effortless. Yet underneath that graceful appearance is one of the toughest perennials you can grow. Russian sage thrives where many plants struggle. Hot summers, dry conditions, poor soil, long stretches without rain. These challenges barely seem to bother it once established. In fact, gardeners often discover that Russian sage performs better when they leave it alone than when they fuss over it. Rich soil can actually encourage excessive growth. Too much fertilizer often produces weaker plants. This is one of those rare perennials that rewards a gardener for doing less. The flowers themselves appear in enormous numbers. Tiny individual blooms cover the stems from midsummer into fall, creating a haze of color that can remain attractive for months. And pollinators absolutely love it. Bees frequently cover the flowers throughout the day. Butterflies visit regularly. The plant essentially becomes a feeding station during the latter half of the growing season. From a design perspective, Russian sage is particularly useful because it pairs beautifully with other late-season perennials. The cool lavender-blue flowers contrast wonderfully with yellow Black-Eyed Susans. They look stunning beside ornamental grasses, and they provide a perfect backdrop for pink and purple flowering plants. If you have a hot, sunny area where other flowers seem to struggle every summer, Russian sage may be exactly what that location has been waiting for. Plant it where it can receive plenty of sunlight, give it room to mature, and allow those tall stems to create the kind of movement that makes a garden feel alive. Because while Russian sage brings height and elegance, the next perennial brings something even more important. It brings butterflies, and lots of them. Plant 3. Purple coneflower. There are flowers that attract pollinators. Then there are flowers that become gathering places for them. Purple coneflower belongs firmly in the second category. On warm summer afternoons, these blooms often seem alive with activity. Bees move from flower to flower. Butterflies stop to feed. Goldfinches arrive later to enjoy the seeds. The plant supports wildlife through multiple seasons, which is one of the reasons it has become such a favorite among gardeners who want more than just visual beauty. The flowers themselves are instantly recognizable. Large pink-purple petals surround a raised orange-brown cone that gives the plant its common name. Each bloom stands proudly above the foliage, creating a display that remains attractive for weeks. And because new flowers continue opening over time, the show often lasts far longer than many gardeners expect. Purple coneflower is also remarkably adaptable. It handles heat well. It tolerates drought once established. It survives cold winters across much of the country. And unlike some highly bred ornamental flowers, it maintains a natural toughness that makes it dependable year after year. This is one reason older gardens often contain clumps that have been growing successfully for decades. Another benefit is its longevity. Many perennials require frequent dividing to stay productive. Coneflowers generally ask for far less attention. Give them sunlight, reasonable drainage, and a little patience during establishment, and they often reward you with years of reliable performance. The seed heads deserve special mention. Many gardeners rush to remove spent flowers at the end of the season. With coneflowers, leaving them standing can create an entirely different kind of beauty. The architectural seed heads add winter interest. Birds feed on them, snow settles on them, and suddenly the garden remains visually interesting long after the flowers have disappeared. That year-round value is one of the reasons so many experienced gardeners consider purple coneflower a permanent member of their landscape. Plant it once, allow it to settle in, and it may become one of the most dependable flowers you ever grow. But while coneflower provides bold blooms and strong structure, the next perennial offers something completely different. It creates a soft blanket of color that seems to flower endlessly. Plant 4. Threadleaf coreopsis. Some flowers make a dramatic entrance and then disappear. Threadleaf coreopsis seems determined to stay as long as possible. From the moment it begins blooming, it often continues producing flowers for months. Not weeks, months. That kind of performance immediately makes it valuable in any perennial garden. The foliage alone is worth noticing. Unlike many flowering plants with broad leaves, threadleaf coreopsis produces delicate, finely textured foliage that almost resembles a soft green cloud. Even before flowering begins, it contributes texture and interest to the landscape. Then the blooms arrive. Bright yellow flowers appear in such abundance that they often cover much of the plant. The effect is cheerful, bright, almost impossible to ignore. And because the flowers sit above that finely textured foliage, the entire plant appears light and airy rather than heavy or dense. This perennial is particularly useful for gardeners who want long-lasting color without constant maintenance. It tolerates heat, it handles drought surprisingly well, and it continues flowering through periods when many other plants begin slowing down. That resilience makes it especially valuable during late summer. Another advantage is its versatility. Threadleaf coreopsis works beautifully in borders. It fits naturally into cottage gardens. It blends easily with native plantings, and it pairs exceptionally well with many of the perennials we're discussing today. The yellow flowers complement purple coneflowers. They contrast beautifully with Russian sage, and they help create the layered look that makes perennial gardens feel full and established. Pollinators appreciate it too. Bees frequently visit the blooms, adding even more life and movement to the garden. And because the flowering period is so long, the plant continues providing nectar long after many other species have finished. If your goal is maximum color from minimum effort, threadleaf coreopsis is one of the strongest candidates on this list. It simply keeps performing, year after year, season after season. And speaking of flowers that shine when autumn approaches, the next perennial may be the single most important late-season bloomer a gardener can grow. Because when many gardens are running out of color, this plant is just beginning its greatest show. Plant 5. Fall-blooming asters. If there is one perennial that truly announces the arrival of autumn, it is the aster. While many flowers are beginning to slow down, asters are preparing for their biggest performance of the entire year. And what a performance it is! Masses of daisy-like flowers appear in shades of purple, lavender, pink, blue, and white, often covering the plant so completely that the foliage nearly disappears beneath the blooms. When planted in groups, the effect can be breathtaking. Entire sections of the garden suddenly come alive with color, just as summer begins fading. That timing alone makes asters incredibly valuable. Most gardeners focus heavily on spring and early summer flowers. The result is a garden that looks spectacular in May and June, but noticeably less impressive by September. Asters solve that problem. They step forward precisely when other plants are stepping back. And pollinators depend on them. By late summer and early fall, nectar sources become increasingly scarce in many regions. Butterflies, bees, and countless beneficial insects begin concentrating on whatever flowers remain available. Asters become one of the busiest destinations in the garden. You may see dozens of pollinators working a mature planting at the same time. That activity brings an entirely different dimension to the landscape. The flowers are beautiful. The wildlife they attract makes them even better. Another reason asters remain so popular is their reliability. Most varieties are hardy, long-lived, and surprisingly adaptable. Once established, they return faithfully every year, often becoming larger and more impressive with age. For best results, place them where they receive plenty of sunlight and reasonable air circulation. The reward is one of the finest autumn displays available to home gardeners, because when the calendar turns toward fall, very few perennials can compete with an aster in full bloom. But if asters dominate the autumn garden with clouds of flowers, the next perennial creates its impact in a completely different way. Instead of thousands of small blooms, it relies on bold flower heads that become more beautiful as the season progresses. Plant 6. Autumn Joy Sedum. Some plants reach their peak and then begin declining. Autumn Joy Sedum seems to improve with age every single season. The transformation begins in summer. At first, the flower heads appear as soft green clusters sitting above thick succulent foliage. They are attractive, but nothing about them prepares you for what comes next. As the weeks pass, those flower heads gradually shift color. Green becomes pale pink. Pink deepens into rosy tones. Eventually, the blooms mature into rich coppery red shades that seem perfectly designed for the autumn landscape. It is like watching several different plants occupy the same space throughout the growing season. That changing color is one of the reasons gardeners treasure this perennial. It delivers visual interest for months rather than weeks. And because the flower heads remain attractive long after blooming ends, the plant continues contributing beauty well into winter. Few perennials provide that kind of extended performance. Another advantage is durability. Autumn Joy Sedum is famous for tolerating conditions that frustrate many other flowers. Heat rarely bothers it. Dry periods seldom slow it down. Poor soil is generally not a problem. In fact, overly rich conditions often create more issues than lean soil. This is a perennial that prefers simplicity. The thick leaves store water efficiently, allowing the plant to remain attractive even during challenging weather. For busy gardeners, that toughness is invaluable, and pollinators absolutely flock to the flowers. Bees are particularly drawn to them during late summer, when many nectar sources are beginning to disappear. A mature sedum in bloom often hums with activity throughout the day. From a design standpoint, Autumn Joy works beautifully alongside ornamental grasses, asters, Russian sage, and black-eyed Susan. Together they create the layered texture and late-season color that make autumn gardens so memorable. If you want one perennial that performs from summer through winter, this is one of the strongest candidates you can plant. And speaking of plants that become more valuable as summer fades, the next perennial solves a problem many gardeners struggle with every year: shade. Plant 7. Japanese anemone. Some of the most difficult gardening spaces are not sunny borders. They are partially shaded areas where many flowering plants struggle to produce a meaningful display. Japanese anemone changes that equation completely. Just when many gardeners have accepted that shade means fewer flowers, this perennial begins producing elegant blooms that seem to float above the garden. The flowers themselves have a graceful quality. Held on tall stems above attractive foliage, they sway gently with every breeze. The effect is refined, peaceful, almost effortless. And because the flowers appear during late summer and fall, they arrive at exactly the moment many shaded gardens need fresh color. White varieties seem to glow during the evening. Pink selections add warmth and softness to woodland settings. Both create a sense of movement that is difficult to achieve with lower-growing plants. Japanese anemones are also remarkably long-lived. Once established, they can remain in the same location for years, gradually forming larger clumps and producing more flowers each season. Many gardeners discover that their anemones become one of the most dependable features in the entire landscape. There is also something timeless about them. These are not flashy plants demanding attention from every corner of the yard. Instead, they reward closer observation, a quiet pathway, a shaded seating area, a woodland border. These are the places where Japanese anemones truly shine. And because relatively few perennials bloom so beautifully in partial shade during autumn, they fill a role that many gardens desperately need. If you've struggled to find reliable late-season color for a shaded location, this may be the answer. Now, before we move on to the next perennial, I want to quickly mention something. By the way, if you're looking to completely transform your yard into a low-maintenance paradise, don't forget that my full reference guide, The Plant Once Garden, is now officially available. It's 150 pages covering all the perennial foundations and permanent setups we talk about on this channel. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen or find the link in the pinned comment below to grab your copy. Now, let's get right back into today's topic, because the next plant delivers one of the rarest flower colors in the garden, true blue. Plant 8, Blue Mist Shrub, Coreopsis. Blue flowers are surprisingly uncommon in the gardening world. There are plenty of purples, plenty of lavenders, plenty of violet shades, but genuine blue flowers are much harder to find. That is one reason Blue Mist Shrub attracts so much attention when it begins blooming. By late summer, clusters of vivid blue flowers appear across the plant, creating a display that immediately stands out among the yellows, oranges, pinks, and reds typically dominating the season. The color feels fresh, unexpected, almost electric against the surrounding greenery. And because the flowers arrive during late summer and early fall, they provide exactly the kind of contrast many gardens need at that time of year. Pollinators notice it immediately. Bees seem especially drawn to the blooms, often covering the plant throughout the day. Butterflies visit regularly as well. The result is a perennial that contributes both beauty and ecological value. Blue Mist Shrub is also appreciated for its manageable size. Unlike larger shrubs that can overwhelm smaller landscapes, it generally remains compact enough to fit comfortably into mixed borders and perennial beds. That versatility makes it useful in a wide range of garden designs. Another advantage is its tolerance for heat and sun. Once established, it handles challenging summer conditions surprisingly well. Give it good drainage and plenty of sunlight, and it rewards you with reliable flowering year after year. What many gardeners love most, however, is the timing. When the bright colors of midsummer are beginning to fade, Blue Mist Shrub introduces an entirely new palette into the landscape. It helps bridge the gap between summer and autumn. It keeps the garden feeling fresh. And it proves that some of the best flowers of the year arrive much later than most people expect. But if Blue Mist Shrub brings bold blue color to the autumn garden, the next perennial brings something completely different: movement, grace, and flowers that seem to dance above the garden every time the wind begins to blow. Plant 9, Gaura. If you've ever watched a planting move in the wind and thought it looked more like a cloud of butterflies than a flower bed, there's a good chance Gaura was involved. Very few perennials create movement the way this one does. Long, slender stems rise above the foliage, carrying dozens of delicate flowers that seem to float effortlessly in the air. Even the slightest breeze sets them dancing. The effect is completely different from the dense flower masses we've discussed so far. Instead of creating a solid block of color, Gaura creates softness. It creates motion, it creates elegance, and that makes it incredibly useful in the garden. The flowers are typically white or soft pink, and they continue appearing for an astonishingly long period. Many gardeners are surprised by just how persistent the blooming can be. While some plants offer one major display and then fade away, Gaura keeps producing flowers week after week, often carrying color from summer deep into autumn. That extended blooming period is one reason it has become increasingly popular in modern landscapes. Another reason is its durability. Gaura thrives in sunny locations and handles heat remarkably well. In many regions, it continues performing during conditions that cause other plants to slow down dramatically. Once established, it is also relatively drought-tolerant, making it an excellent choice for gardeners looking to reduce maintenance. What truly sets it apart, however, is the atmosphere it creates. Some plants command attention. Gaura creates a feeling. A mature planting has an airy quality that softens everything around it. Pair it with ornamental grasses, and the movement becomes even more dramatic. Combine it with black-eyed Susan or coneflowers, and it adds contrast that makes both plants look even better. The pollinators appreciate it as well. Bees and butterflies regularly visit the flowers throughout the blooming season, adding even more life to an already dynamic display. For gardeners who want a perennial that brings motion and grace to the landscape, Gaura is one of the finest choices available. But if Gaura excels in sunny borders, the next perennial thrives where many flowering plants struggle: deep shade, and its flowers look like something from another world. Plant 10. Toad Lily. Most gardeners have never seen a toad lily in bloom, and the first time they do, they usually stop and stare. The flowers don't look like typical garden flowers. They look exotic, intricate, almost tropical. Tiny orchid-like blooms appear along the stems during late summer and fall, covered with fascinating spots and patterns that immediately draw attention. In many gardens, toad lily becomes one of the most talked-about plants simply because visitors have never seen anything quite like it. And that uniqueness is only part of the story. Its real value comes from where it grows. Many gardeners have difficult shaded locations where flowering options seem limited. The deeper the shade, the fewer choices they have. Toad lily thrives in exactly those conditions: woodland gardens, shaded borders, areas beneath mature trees, locations that frustrate many sun-loving perennials. These become ideal homes for toad lily. The foliage remains attractive throughout the season, creating a lush green backdrop long before flowering begins. Then, just as summer starts transitioning into autumn, the blooms appear. That timing is especially important. Many shade gardens experience a shortage of flowers during late summer. Toad lily fills that gap beautifully. And because the flowers arrive when so few other shade-loving perennials are blooming, they often become the focal point of the entire area. The plant itself is surprisingly easy to grow once established. It appreciates moisture, organic matter, and protection from harsh afternoon sun. Provide those conditions, and it rewards you with years of reliable performance. There is also an element of discovery that comes with growing toad lily. It isn't a plant that shouts for attention from across the yard. Instead, it rewards gardeners who slow down and look closely. The intricate patterns, the unusual flower shape, the timing of the blooms, everything about it feels special. And sometimes, those are the plants that become our favorites. Because while everyone notices the obvious flowers, the truly memorable gardens often contain surprises hidden among the foliage. Speaking of memorable flowers, the final perennial on today's list delivers months of color, incredible heat tolerance, and some of the brightest blooms you'll see all season. Plant 11. Blanket Flower. Gaillardia aristata. There are flowers that survive summer, and there are flowers that seem to celebrate it. Blanket flower belongs firmly in the second category. The hotter the weather becomes, the happier this perennial often appears. Its flowers radiate warm shades of red, orange, yellow, and gold, creating displays that look almost like miniature sunsets scattered throughout the garden. The colors are bold, cheerful, impossible to ignore. And because the blooms appear in such abundance, the visual impact can be remarkable. One reason gardeners love blanket flower is its incredible blooming season. Given proper conditions, it can continue producing flowers for months. Deadheading often encourages even more blooms, extending the display well into autumn. That kind of performance makes it one of the hardest working perennials in the garden. But beauty alone isn't what earns it a place on this list. Its toughness is equally impressive. Blanket flower handles heat extremely well. It tolerates drought better than many traditional garden perennials. It performs reliably in sunny locations where less resilient plants often struggle. And once established, it generally asks for very little in return. This is a flower that understands self-sufficiency. Pollinators appreciate it too. Butterflies frequently visit the blooms, while bees work the flowers throughout the growing season. That steady pollinator activity helps keep the garden vibrant and full of life. Another advantage is its compatibility with other late-season performers. Blanket flower looks spectacular alongside black-eyed Susan. It complements Russian sage beautifully, and it combines wonderfully with ornamental grasses as autumn approaches. Together, these plants create the kind of layered color that keeps a garden looking exciting for months. One important note is to choose Gaillardia aristata or a known perennial hybrid if your goal is long-term performance. Doing so helps ensure you're planting a variety that returns reliably year after year, rather than one that behaves more like a short-lived plant. For gardeners seeking maximum color with minimum fuss, blanket flower remains one of the best investments available. It blooms generously, it handles difficult conditions, and it continues proving its value season after season. Now that you've seen all 11 perennials, there's one important question left to answer. Why does this late July and early August planting window matter so much in the first place? Every perennial you've seen today can be planted at other times of the year. So why focus so heavily on late July and early August? Because what happens underground during the next several weeks will determine what happens above ground for years. Most gardeners judge plants by what they can see: the flowers, the foliage, the height, the color. But the real story is happening beneath the soil surface. During late July and early August, the soil is still carrying the warmth accumulated throughout summer. Root systems are active. New roots develop quickly. The plant isn't fighting cold soil, and it isn't trying to wake up from winter dormancy. That creates a valuable opportunity. When you plant during this period, the perennial can focus much of its energy on establishing roots before winter arrives. Those roots anchor the plant. They store energy. They prepare the perennial for next spring, and that preparation often makes the difference between a plant that merely survives and a plant that truly thrives. Think about a purple coneflower planted today. By the time spring arrives, it has already spent months building its foundation. The same is true for black-eyed Susan, for asters, for sedum, for Japanese anemones, for every perennial on today's list. You're not simply planting flowers for this season. You're investing in future seasons. And that's exactly why experienced gardeners pay close attention to this window. But before you start planting, there are 3 rules that will dramatically increase your chances of success. Most gardening failures don't happen because gardeners choose the wrong plants. They happen because one of these 3 fundamentals gets overlooked. Rule number 1. Water deeply, not constantly. Many gardeners accidentally train roots to stay near the soil surface. They water lightly every day. The top inch becomes moist. The deeper soil remains dry. The roots respond by staying shallow. Then a hot spell arrives. The soil surface dries quickly. And suddenly the plant begins struggling. Instead, water deeply. Encourage roots to travel downward where moisture remains more stable. A deep root system creates a stronger perennial. A stronger perennial produces more flowers. And a stronger perennial handles drought far better than one with shallow roots. For newly planted perennials, this principle is especially important during the first several weeks after planting. Rule number 2. Mulch is not optional. If there is one simple step that can improve almost every perennial planting, it is mulch. A proper layer helps regulate soil temperature. It slows moisture loss. It suppresses weeds, and it reduces the stress young plants experience during establishment. Think of mulch as protective insulation for your garden. The soil stays cooler during hot weather. Moisture remains available longer, and roots can focus on growing instead of constantly dealing with environmental extremes. Just remember to keep mulch slightly away from the crown of the plant rather than piling it directly against stems. That one small adjustment prevents many common problems. Rule number 3. Give perennials room to become themselves. One of the most common mistakes gardeners make is planting everything too closely together. It's easy to understand why. A young perennial often looks small. The temptation is to fill every empty space immediately. But remember what these plants are designed to do: grow, expand, return bigger every year. That black-eyed Susan will become larger. That aster will become larger. That sedum will become larger. The space that looks empty today often disappears completely within a few growing seasons. Give these plants the room they deserve now, and they'll reward you later with healthier growth, better airflow, fewer disease problems, and stronger flowering displays. And perhaps most importantly, resist the urge to judge them too quickly. Perennials are long-term gardeners. Some spend their first season establishing, their second season expanding, their third season showing you exactly why you planted them in the first place. Patience is often rewarded generously. Imagine stepping into your garden this September. The black-eyed Susans are glowing gold. The Russian sage is swaying in the breeze. Butterflies are moving between coneflowers and asters. The sedums are beginning their autumn color transformation. Japanese anemones are brightening shaded corners. Gaura is dancing above the borders. Blue mist shrub is covered in blue flowers. Blanket flowers are still producing bloom after bloom. And while many gardens are winding down, yours is still putting on a show. That future begins with the decisions you make today. The planting window is open right now. The soil is ready. The season is ready. The only question is which perennial you're going to plant first. If you're ready to stop wasting time on plants that die every winter and finally build a garden that takes care of itself, don't forget to grab your copy of The Plant Once Garden. It's 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, completely mapped out for you. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the description below to get started. And before you go, tell me in the comments which one of these 11 perennials you're most excited to plant this year. Is it black-eyed Susan, Russian sage, purple coneflower, aster, or maybe one of the more unusual choices like toad lily or Japanese anemone? I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.